Hey, what's up you guys, it's Dorothy and welcome back to my channel. In today's video we're going to go into the Women of the Bible Speak. It is the introduction of this book that we're about to do in this video. So let me get to where it is. There is, obviously, because it says the 16 women and lessons, there's 16 chapters in this book, but this is going to be the introduction. So let's get right into this video. If you do not want to read or listen to me read about the women of the Bible, you have the right to click off the video, so this is your warning to do so now. Introduction. This time will be different, it has to be. I often wonder what ran through the mind of the women whose story is so powerful that it isn't woven through 3 of the Gospels yet. We don't even know her name. We do have plenty of details, though, about just how dire her situation was. She suffered with bleeding for 12 long years. During the time, she must have had moments to complete despondence. In the time when she lived, this woman's affliction would have caused her not only physical pain, but also emotional isolation. According to custom, she would not have been able to worship in a temple, and many would have considered her unclean. This likely would have meant she couldn't touch the people she loved most, her own family and friends. She may have been banned from visiting markets or seeking any real community connections. Mark tells us she had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. Mark 5:26. After so many years, so many dead ends, there must have been times when she thought this was how her story would end, with her hopeless and helpless, and yet Mark goes on to tell us that she had heard the reports about Jesus, Mark 5:27, that was all it took for this disheartened woman to move forward. Word of Jesus' miracles had spread far and wide, and crowds often followed him, pushing in on every side, eager to hear his words and see if he could make a difference in their lives. The stories gave root to the tiniest seed of hope in the woman's heart, a little green shoot that gave her the courage to take a big risk. Matthew maps out her strategy. She said to herself, "If I only touch his cloak, I will be healed." Matthew 9:21. So that was the entirety of her plan, to get close to Jesus as possible, touch his cloak, and receive a miracle. Bold. Remember, she likely wasn't even supposed to leave her home, certainly not to be in a crowd where she would come in contact with other people, not to mention Jesus himself. In her despair, she must have felt there was no other options left. When she finally got to where Jesus was, he was on his way to attend to the request of a powerful man who had begged him to save his dying daughter. And was often the case, this attracted spectators. Mark describes it as a great crowd that thronged about him. Mark 5:24. The ailing woman worked her way close enough to reach out the miracle worker she heard so much about. Luke shares the powerful moment. In the simplest language writing, she came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. Luke 8:44. Mark says immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. Mark 5:29. That was it, but the story still wasn't over. Jesus knew what had happened. He looked to the crowd and asked his disciples who had touched him. You can almost hear the laughter in Peter's voice as he replies, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." Luke 8:45. Here's the thing, the woman knew that a man so powerful there might mere contact with him, his garment, would heal her, certainly figure out whom he had healed. And both Mark and Luke were told that she went to Jesus in fear and trembling, falling down before him and telling him the whole truth. Was she afraid she was about to be exposed as unclean and an unclean rule breaker who shouldn't have even been there? Jesus didn't breathe or humiliate her in front of the enormous crowd hanging on his every word. He only could have known that in the moment just how much she had suffered, or how she had courageously and humbly bundled all of her hopes into the simple act of touching the hem of his garment. In all the gospel accounts, he calls her daughter and tells her, "Your faith has made you well." Think for a moment how those words must have felt to someone likely living as an outcast, uttered as they were before the multitudes hanging on Jesus' every word. They would have constituted public acceptance. Though his power was clearly the source of her healing, Jesus identified her faith as having activated her cure. After more than a decade of suffering, bad news, and financial ruin, she was finally free, healed in an instant, all because she dared reach out to him for help with every earthly avenue had ended in the nothing but loss and despair. For many of us, 2020 was a year filled with pain, physical, financial, emotion, and mental. We often felt isolated, kept away from our loved ones, and disconnected from our houses of worship and the sense of community they provide. They were adversaries we could have not imagined we'd face in our lifetimes, hardships piled on top of one another, and yet there was hope. There was refuge. There was inspiration and healing. Throughout the Bible, women are the center of some of the most critical events that they would bold and brave, finding courage in moments when everything hung in the balance. They were voices of truth and reason. They were steady and creative, following God's direction when it didn't make sense by the world stands. In this book, you'll hear the stories, watch the women come alive as we dig into their lives' significance. Individually, their accounts are powerful, yet here we will consider the women in pairs, finding the commonalities in their callings and challenges. Some of the women knew one another, others were connected simply by a thread of common purpose, one that becomes more illuminated as we study the women side by side. I pray you'll find comfort and hope as we take this journey together. That is the end of this introduction. I will see you guys in the next video for chapter 1. Bye!